Montana Territory, 1878. Isaac Lawson stood at the edge of his property, watching the sun bleed across the horizon like a wound that would not heal. At 25, he had built everything himself: the small ranch house, the sturdy barn, the corrals that held his modest herd of cattle. But as twilight settled over the grasslands, the silence pressed against him like a physical weight. The frontier was no place for love, he had learned. It was a place for survival, for working until your hands bled and your back screamed, for watching your neighbors buried after harsh winters or Indian raids. His father had loved his mother, and when fever took her during Isaac's 10th year, his father had simply stopped living. The man had walked through another 5 years like a ghost before a fall from his horse ended his suffering. Isaac had vowed then, watching them lower his father into the frozen ground, that he would never let another person mean that much to him. But the ranch needed a woman. That was simply practical. The territorial governor was offering land grants to married settlers, an additional 160 acres to anyone with a family to prove they intended to stay. Isaac needed that land. The creek ran through it, and without water rights, his herd would never grow beyond subsistence level. He needed a wife the way he needed a good horse, as a tool for survival, nothing more. The advertisement he had placed in the Chicago newspaper 3 months ago had been straightforward: rancher in Montana Territory seeks wife, must be healthy, hard-working, and of good moral character. Comfort provided but not luxury. Respond with photograph and references. 7 women had responded. He had chosen Fiona Grayson because her letter had been the most practical, devoid of romantic nonsense. She was 22, an orphan who had been working as a seamstress in Chicago. Her photograph showed a pretty enough face with blonde hair pulled back severely, but it was her words that had decided him. I understand that frontier marriage is a partnership of necessity. I ask only for safety and the chance to build something lasting. I will work hard and expect the same. Now, as the stage was due to arrive in Bitterroot the next morning, Isaac felt something he refused to name as fear. He told himself it was simply the anxiety of any major purchase. A wife would change everything about his carefully ordered life, but it was necessary. He would be kind but distant. He would provide for her and expect her labor in return, and he would never, ever let her close enough to hurt him the way loss had hurt his father. The morning came cold and bright. Isaac rode into Bitterroot before dawn, his best horse brushed until his coat gleamed, his own shirt cleaned and pressed as well as a man living alone could manage. The town was barely more than a wide spot in the road: a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, and the stage office. A dozen buildings clinging to existence in the vast emptiness of the territory. He waited on the wooden sidewalk, his stomach tight. The stage came rattling in an hour past schedule, dust billowing behind it like smoke. The driver climbed down, began unloading bags and crates. Then the door opened and she stepped out. Isaac's breath caught despite himself. The photograph had not prepared him. Fiona Grayson was beautiful in a way that seemed impossible out here, as if some delicate flower had been transplanted into harsh soil. Her hair was pale blonde, almost silver in the morning light, and though she had tried to pin it severely back, wisps escaped around her face. She wore a practical traveling dress of dark blue wool, but it could not hide the gentle curves of her figure. Her eyes, when they met his, were the color of a mountain lake, that startling blue-green that seemed almost unreal. But it was not her beauty that stopped him. It was the expression on her face. She looked terrified and determined in equal measure, and suddenly Isaac saw himself reflected back, someone gambling everything on a desperate hope. "Miss Grayson," he stepped forward, removing his hat, "I am Isaac Lawson." "Mr. Lawson." Her voice was softer than he had expected, with a slight tremor she was clearly trying to hide. "Thank you for coming to meet me." Up close, he could see she was even younger than her 22 years suggested, with a scattering of freckles across her nose that the photograph had missed. But there were shadows under her eyes, and her dress, though clean and well-made, had been mended in several places. Whatever her life in Chicago had been, it had not been easy. "Your journey was not too difficult?" he asked, the formal words feeling awkward on his tongue. "It was long." She glanced around the small town and he saw something flicker in her expression, disappointment perhaps or fear. "Is this Bitterroot?" "Yes, my ranch is about an hour's ride west. I have a wagon waiting." He gestured toward the buckboard he had tied in front of the general store. "I thought we could see the preacher first, get the marriage done, then head out to the ranch before dark." Her eyes widened. "Today, you want to marry today?" That was the arrangement, was it not? Isaac kept his voice level, but he felt a flicker of irritation. What had she expected? "Unless you have changed your mind." "No," the word came quickly, almost desperately. "No, I have not changed my mind. I simply thought—" She stopped, drew a breath. "You are right. We should see the preacher." As he loaded her single trunk onto the wagon, everything she owned in the world, apparently, Isaac noticed her hands trembling. She kept them folded tightly in front of her, her knuckles white. The practical, no-nonsense woman from the letter seemed very far away. This was a frightened girl, barely more than a child, stepping into a marriage with a stranger in a land she did not know. Something twisted in his chest, an unwelcome feeling he pushed away firmly. This was business. She had agreed to the terms. They would both get what they needed and nothing more. The preacher lived behind the small church at the edge of town. Reverend Morrison was a weathered man in his 50s who had performed enough mail-order marriages to ask no questions. He called his wife in to serve as witness, and the ceremony was completed in less than 10 minutes. Isaac placed the thin gold band he had purchased on Fiona's finger. Her hand was so small in his, and he could feel her shaking. And when the preacher told him to kiss his bride, he brushed his lips against her cheek as briefly as politeness allowed. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Lawson," the preacher said, closing his Bible. "May God bless your union." Fiona said nothing. Her face had gone pale, and she stared at the ring on her finger as if she could not quite believe it was there. They made one stop at the general store, where Isaac purchased supplies and introduced his new wife to Mr. Henderson, who ran the establishment. Then they climbed onto the wagon bench, and Isaac turned the horses west, toward home. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the whisper of wind through the grass. The land spread out in all directions, endless waves of golden prairie dotted with sage. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white with snow even in late May. It was beautiful in its vastness, but Isaac could see how it might look to someone fresh from the city, empty, hostile, terrifying. "The ranch is small," he said finally, feeling obligated to break the silence. "Just over 300 acres now, but with the land grant for married settlers, we will have 500. I run about 100 head of cattle. There are chickens, a milk cow, a garden plot. The house is simple but sound." "It sounds fine." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I rise before dawn. The work is constant, feeding animals, mending fences, checking the herd. I will need your help with the house, the garden, the chickens, cooking, cleaning, washing. Can you do those things?" "Yes," she paused. "I may not do them well at first, but I will learn." He glanced at her. "You said in your letter you were a seamstress." "I was for 4 years in a dress shop." Her hands tightened in her lap. "The shop closed 6 months ago. I have been working in a factory since then, making shirts. 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, for wages that barely covered my room in a boarding house." There was no self-pity in her voice, just statement of fact, but Isaac felt that unwelcome twist in his chest again. "You have no family?" "No," the word was flat. "My parents died when I was 12, yellow fever. I have been on my own since then." 12, she had been surviving alone since she was 12 years old. Suddenly her desperate acceptance of his proposal made more sense. She had not been choosing a romantic adventure. She had been choosing survival, same as him. "The frontier is hard," he said, more gently than he had intended. "But you will have a roof over your head and food in your belly. I am not a cruel man, Mrs. Lawson. I will not mistreat you." She turned to look at him then, really look at him, and he saw intelligence in those blue-green eyes and something deeper, a loneliness that matched his own. "Why did you want a wife, Mr. Lawson, truly?" The question caught him off guard. He considered lying, giving her some acceptable answer, but something in her steady gaze demanded honesty. The land grant, I need the additional acreage. And I need help running the ranch. A man alone cannot build much out here. So it is business. Yes. Good, she nodded, turned back to face the road. That is what I need as well, business, partnership, not, she stopped. Not what, he prompted, not love, the word came out bitter. I learned young that love is dangerous, it makes you weak, it makes you vulnerable. I have seen what happens when women think marriage is about love. They end up trapped, disappointed, or buried. I want safety and stability, Mr. Lawson. I want to build something that lasts. If we can give each other that, without pretending to feelings we do not have, then perhaps we can make this work. Isaac stared at her, shocked. She had just articulated his own belief, his own protective fear, and hearing it from her lips felt like looking into a mirror. This young woman, barely more than a girl, had already learned the lesson that had taken his father's death to teach him. Then we understand each other, he said quietly. Yes, she met his eyes again. We do. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The house looked small and lonely in the vastness of the prairie, but Fiona studied it with an expression Isaac could not read. He helped her down from the wagon and she stood for a moment, one hand pressed to the small of her back, stretching after the long journey. Come inside, he said. I will show you around, then get your trunk. The house was simple, a main room that served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a table he had built himself. There was a bedroom off to one side and a small loft above that he had been using for storage. It was clean because he was not a messy man, but it was stark, functional, with none of the touches that made a place a home. Fiona walked through slowly, running her hand along the table, the back of the single chair, the mantel above the fireplace. You built all this yourself. Most of it, the house was here when I claimed the land, but it was barely standing. I spent the first year rebuilding. You have done well, she turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. It is more than I had hoped for. Isaac felt an unexpected flush of pride at her words. The bedroom is yours, he said gruffly. I will sleep in the loft. Her eyes widened. Mr. Lawson, I am aware of the expectations of marriage. You do not need to. The loft is fine, he interrupted. I have been sleeping there anyway. You have had a long journey. You need rest. She studied him for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing far more than he wanted to reveal. Thank you, she said finally. That is kind. He busied himself bringing in her trunk, showing her where things were kept. The pump outside for water, the privy beyond the barn, the chicken coop where she would gather eggs each morning. She followed him, asking quiet questions, memorizing everything. By the time he had finished, full dark had fallen and they stood awkwardly in the main room, lit only by the fire he had built. There is bread and cheese, he said. And dried apples, nothing fancy. That sounds perfect. She moved to the table and he noticed she was limping slightly. Are you hurt? The words came out sharper than he intended, just sore from the journey. I will be fine, she sat carefully and he saw her wince. Without thinking, Isaac knelt beside her chair. Let me see. Mr. Lawson, really. Let me see, he repeated more gently. Reluctantly, she lifted the hem of her skirt a few inches. Her boots were worn thin, and he could see bloodstains on her stockings. She had walked through this entire evening on blistered, bleeding feet without complaint. Why did you not say something? He stood, moved to the shelf where he kept his medical supplies, limited but necessary in a place where the nearest doctor was 2 days' ride away. I did not want to seem weak on my first day. Her voice was quiet. I did not want you to regret choosing me. Isaac returned with clean cloths and salve, knelt again. Take off your boots. Mr. Lawson. Isaac, if we are married, you should use my given name, and take off your boots. She hesitated, then slowly unlaced the worn leather. When she peeled away her stockings, he winced. The blisters were angry and open, and she must have been in agony during the wagon ride. He cleaned the wounds as gently as he could, though she still gasped at the sting. Her feet were small and pale, delicate as everything else about her. He applied the salve carefully, then wrapped them in clean cloth. "You will stay off them tomorrow," he said, not looking up. "Let them heal." "I cannot, there is work to do." "You said." "I said many things, but I also said I am not a cruel man." He finished tying off the bandage, sat back on his heels. "The work will wait a day." When he finally looked up, he found her staring at him with an expression that made his chest tight. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are the first person in a very long time to show me kindness." Isaac stood abruptly, uncomfortable with the emotion in the room. "I will get the bread and cheese. You should eat, then rest." They ate in silence, the crackling fire the only sound between them. Isaac was acutely aware of her presence in a way he had not expected. She was so small, so delicate, yet there was steel beneath that soft exterior. She had survived alone for 10 years. She had traveled across half a continent to marry a stranger. She had walked on bleeding feet without complaint. Whatever else Fiona Grayson, Fiona Lawson might be, she was not weak. "I should explain something," he said finally, pushing his plate away. "I told you this marriage is business, and I meant that, but I am not a complete brute." "I will not expect," he stopped, frustrated with his own awkwardness. "I will not force anything on you that you do not want. We can take time to adjust to each other." Her shoulders, which had been tight with tension, relaxed slightly. "I appreciate that." "Good." He stood, began gathering the plates. "You should sleep. Morning comes early on a ranch." She rose carefully, favoring her injured feet. At the bedroom door she paused and looked back. "Isaac." It was the first time she had used his name, and the sound of it on her lips did something strange to his heartbeat. "Yes." "I am glad it was you who answered my letter. I think," she hesitated. "I think we will manage well together." Before he could respond, she slipped into the bedroom and closed the door. Isaac stood alone in the main room, staring at that closed door, feeling the walls of his carefully constructed isolation beginning to crack. He climbed to the loft eventually, spreading his bedroll on the rough boards. But sleep was long in coming. He kept thinking about the fear and determination in her eyes when she stepped off that stage. The way her hand had trembled in his during the ceremony, the blood on her stockings. The loneliness in her voice when she said love was dangerous. She was not supposed to matter. This was supposed to be simple, practical, safe. But as he listened to the soft sounds of her moving around in the room below, Isaac felt the first whisper of something that terrified him far more than any harsh frontier winter or cattle stampede. He felt the walls around his heart beginning to shift, and he did not know how to stop it. The first week passed in a blur of awkward adjustment. Fiona's feet healed slowly, and true to his word, Isaac made her rest that first full day. He handled the morning chores himself, then showed her around the property, the extent of his land where the cattle grazed, the creek that marked the southern boundary. She asked intelligent questions and remembered everything he told her. She learned to gather eggs without frightening the chickens, to milk the cow with increasing confidence, to work the pump until water flowed clear and cold. She cooked simple meals that were better than anything he had eaten in years of batch cooking. She washed clothes in the big tub behind the house, hanging them on the line he strung for her. She mended his shirts with tiny, perfect stitches that made his own repairs look like a child's work. They were painfully polite to each other. They spoke only of practical matters, what needed doing, what supplies they needed, how the cattle were faring. At night, they sat on opposite sides of the table, the silence stretching between them like a physical barrier. Then she would retire to the bedroom, and he would climb to the loft, and they would lie awake in their separate spaces, so close and yet utterly apart. But small moments began to accumulate, cracks in the armor they both wore. The morning he came in from checking fence lines to find fresh bread cooling on the table, and she smiled shyly when he praised it. The afternoon thunderstorm when she ran out to help him bring in the horses, her hair coming loose from its pins, laughing as rain soaked them both. The evening he found her in the garden, talking softly to the seedlings she had planted, and realized how desperately lonely she must be in this isolated place. "Do you miss Chicago?" he asked one night after supper. It was the first personal question he had asked since their wedding day. She considered while drying the last plate. I miss having people around, the noise of the city, the crowds. Here it is so quiet, sometimes I think I have gone deaf. She paused. But I do not miss the factory, or the boarding house where the walls were so thin I could hear everyone's sorrows. Or the fear that came with every first of the month, wondering if I could make rent. You are safe here, he said, surprising himself with the fierceness in his voice. You will never have to worry about rent or food or any of that again. She turned to look at him, and something soft and vulnerable crossed her face. I am beginning to believe that. 2 weeks after her arrival, Isaac rode into Bitterroot for supplies and to file the paperwork for the land grant. When he returned that evening, later than expected, he found Fiona standing on the porch with his rifle in her hands, her face white but determined. There was a man, she said as he dismounted, riding around the property. He did not come close to the house, but he watched for a long time. Cold fear flooded Isaac's chest. What did he look like? Big, dark hair, dark beard, he wore a red bandana. Her hands tightened on the rifle. I almost fired a warning shot, but I was not sure if that was the right thing to do. You did right by not shooting. Isaac took the rifle gently from her hands, checked that it was loaded. That sounds like Dutch Carver. He is a rancher about 10 miles north. He wanted to buy this land before I claimed it, and he has never quite accepted no for an answer. Is he dangerous? He can be. Isaac kept his voice calm, but his mind was racing. Carver was a bully and a bastard, with a dozen men working for him and few scruples about how he expanded his holdings. Isaac's claim was legal and filed, but that might not matter if Carver decided to push the issue. Did he say anything, try to approach? No, he just watched, then he rode away. She wrapped her arms around herself. I was frightened. I kept thinking about you coming home and finding. She stopped, shook her head. I am sorry. I know this is just a business arrangement. I should not worry like that. But Isaac saw the truth in her eyes. Whatever she told herself, whatever walls she had built, she had been terrified something might happen to him. And the realization that she had stood guard with a rifle she barely knew how to use, ready to defend his property, did something to those walls around his own heart. You were right to worry, he said quietly, and right to be ready. But Fiona, he waited until she met his eyes. I am not going anywhere, I promise you that. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. You cannot promise that. The frontier is dangerous. People die. People do die, he agreed. But I do not plan to be one of them. I have too much to protect now. He meant the land, he told himself. The cattle, his investment. But as he looked at her standing there on his porch, her hair gleaming silver in the sunset, he knew he was lying to himself. That night he did not climb immediately to the loft. Instead, he sat at the table while she mended one of his shirts and told her about Carver, how he had tried to intimidate Isaac when he first claimed the land, how there had been several suspicious incidents over the years. A fence cut, cattle scattered, a small fire in the barn that Isaac had caught early. Nothing he could prove, but enough to establish a pattern. Will he try something more now that you have the additional land? She asked, her needle moving steadily through the fabric. Maybe, probably. Isaac ran a hand through his hair. I should teach you to shoot properly, not just hold the rifle, but actually hit what you aim at. I would like that. She finished the shirt, folded it neatly. I do not want to be helpless. Over the next week, Isaac spent an hour each evening teaching her to handle the rifle. She was a quick study, and though she flinched at first from the recoil, she soon learned to brace for it. By the end of the week, she could hit the target he set up behind the barn more often than not. Good, he said, watching her load and fire with increasing confidence. Now again, but faster. She gave him a look that was almost playful. You are a demanding teacher. I am a teacher who wants his student to stay alive. But he softened the words with a small smile, and she returned it. These moments were becoming more frequent, small exchanges that felt almost like friendship. Almost like something more. They would catch each other's eyes across the table, and one of them would smile. She would hum while working in the garden, and he would find himself listening, memorizing the melody. He would come in from the range and see her standing at the window, and his heart would lift in a way that terrified him. A month after her arrival, Fiona announced she wanted to ride out with him to check the cattle. "I have been here 4 weeks," she said, "and I have barely seen any of the ranch. I want to understand what you do." Isaac hesitated. It was a full day's ride to check the entire range, and he worried about her. She was still new to horses, and the sun could be brutal. But the hopeful look in her eyes decided him. "We leave at dawn," he said. "Dress warm, it gets cold in the mornings." They rode out as the sun was turning the eastern sky pink. Isaac had saddled his gentlest horse for her, and though she sat somewhat awkwardly at first, she soon found her rhythm. They moved through the tall grass in comfortable silence, and Isaac pointed out landmarks. The distinctive rock formation that marked his northern boundary, the stand of cottonwoods where the cattle liked to gather in the heat of the day, the place where he planned to build a second barn once the land grant was finalized. "It is beautiful," she said softly, gazing out at the rolling grasslands. "Different from anything I have ever known, but beautiful." "You think so?" He was surprised. "Most people from back east saw only emptiness out here." "Yes," she turned to him, and her face was more open than he had ever seen it. "In Chicago, everything was crowded and dirty. The air was full of smoke from the factories, and you could never see the stars. Here," she gestured at the vast sky, "here you can breathe, here there is room to be yourself." They stopped for lunch by the creek, letting the horses drink while they shared the bread and cheese Fiona had packed. She sat on a sun-warmed rock, her face tilted up to the light, and Isaac found himself watching her instead of eating. She had begun to change in the weeks since her arrival. The shadows under her eyes had faded. Her skin had taken on color from working outdoors. She smiled more easily, laughed at small things. The frightened girl from the stage had begun to transform into someone stronger, more confident. "You are staring," she said, not opening her eyes. "I was just thinking you looked different, happier maybe." She opened her eyes, turned to look at him. "I am happier. I know we said this was just business, Isaac, but I want you to know I am grateful for everything you have given me, a home, safety, a chance to build something." "You have given me things too," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "The house feels like a home now instead of just a building. I eat real food instead of whatever I can throw together," and he stopped, unsure how to finish. "And what? And it is not as lonely." There, he had admitted it. "I did not realize how lonely I was until you arrived." Her expression softened. "I was lonely too, so lonely I thought it would kill me sometimes. But here with you," she stopped, shook her head. "Never mind, we should get moving. You said you wanted to check the north pasture." But something had shifted between them in that moment. A line had been crossed, an admission made. As they rode on, Isaac was acutely aware of her beside him, the way she moved with the horse's rhythm, the sound of her voice when she asked questions about the cattle. The way the sun caught in her hair, turning it to spun silver. This was dangerous. This was exactly what he had vowed to avoid. But he could not seem to stop the feeling growing in his chest, spreading like warmth through his whole body. They found the cattle scattered across the north pasture, grazing peacefully. Isaac counted heads, checked for injuries or illness, made mental notes about which animals were ready for market. Fiona watched it all with interest, and he found himself explaining things he had never bothered to put into words before: how you could tell a cow's health by her coat, which bulls sired the strongest calves, how the grass quality varied across different parts of the range. "You love this," she said. It was not a question. "I do." He had never admitted that either. "It is hard work, and sometimes I think I am insane for trying to build something out here. But yes, I love it." "Then I will love it too," she said simply. "I will help you build this into something that lasts." They started back as the sun was lowering in the west, painting everything gold. Halfway home, they crested a rise, and Isaac saw something that made him pull his horse up short. Smoke, black smoke, too much of it, coming from the direction of the ranch. "No," the word tore from his throat. He spurred his horse forward, and behind him he heard Fiona cry out and follow. They galloped across the prairie, and with every second the smoke grew thicker. Isaac's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. The house. The barn, please not the barn with all his equipment, his winter hay, the animals trapped inside. They came over the last rise and he saw it was the barn. Flames licked up the sides and the structure was already half collapsed. But someone had opened the doors, the animals were out, milling around in confusion, and a figure was beating at the flames with a wet blanket. Isaac was off his horse before it stopped moving, running toward the fire. The figure turned and he saw it was Sarah Henderson, the storekeeper's daughter, her face black with soot. "I saw the smoke from the road," she gasped. "I got the animals out, but I cannot stop it." "Fiona, the pump!" Isaac yelled, and she was already moving. He grabbed the blanket from Sarah, ran toward the barn. The heat hit him like a wall, but he pushed through, beating at the flames. Fiona appeared with a bucket of water, threw it on the fire, ran back for more. Sarah joined her, and the three of them worked frantically, hauling water, throwing it on the flames, beating at the embers. It took an hour before they had the fire controlled, and by then the barn was a total loss. The roof had caved in, the walls were charred skeletons, everything inside destroyed. Isaac stood staring at the ruins, his clothes soaked, his lungs burning from smoke, his mind trying to calculate the cost. The building materials, the hay, the tack, the winter feed, months of work and most of his savings gone. "Isaac," Fiona was beside him, her face streaked with soot and tears. "I am so sorry." "Not your fault," his voice came out flat, emotionless. Inside he felt like he was breaking, but he could not let it show. "Bad luck. These things happen. Like hell, it is just bad luck." Sarah Henderson stepped up beside them, breathing hard. "I came by to bring you a message from my father about your supply order. When I came over the rise, I saw a rider leaving. Big man on a dark horse with a red bandana. He was heading north, riding fast. Then I saw the smoke. Dutch Carver, of course it was Carver. The rage that filled Isaac's chest was so intense he thought he might choke on it. Carver had done this to drive him off the land, to make him give up and sell, and it might work. Without the barn, without his hay and equipment, Isaac did not know how he would make it through the winter. "I am riding after him," he said. "I am going to." "You are going to do nothing." Fiona's voice was sharp. "You are going to stay here with me and figure out how to rebuild." "Fiona, he burned my barn. He tried to kill my animals. If Sarah had not been here. If Sarah had not been here, it would have been a disaster. But she was, and the animals are safe, and you are not going to get yourself killed chasing after a man with a dozen hands and no conscience." Her eyes were blazing, fierce in a way he had never seen. "You promised me you were not going anywhere. You promised me." The reminder stopped him cold. He had promised. And she was right, riding after Carver alone would be suicide. But the rage still burned in his chest, demanding action. "We go to the sheriff," Sarah said. "We tell him what I saw. It is not proof, but it is something. And everyone knows Carver's reputation. Maybe this time he will face consequences." Isaac wanted to argue, but he looked at Fiona's face. The fear and determination there, the plea in her eyes, and something in him surrendered. "Fine, we go to the sheriff tomorrow, but if he does nothing. If he does nothing, we will figure it out together." Fiona reached for his hand, and after a moment he let her take it. Her fingers were small and soot-stained, but they held his firmly. "Together, Isaac, you do not have to face this alone." Sarah left after helping them secure the animals in the corral for the night. Isaac and Fiona walked through the ruins of the barn one more time, salvaging what little they could. A few tools that had been far enough from the fire, some tack that was scorched but usable. It was nearly midnight when they finally stumbled into the house, exhausted and reeking of smoke. "You should wash," Fiona said. "I will heat water." "You should wash too. You worked as hard as I did." "Then we will take turns." She heated water on the stove, and Isaac washed in the big tub while she politely turned her back. Then she bathed while he did the same. They moved around each other with careful courtesy, but he was intensely aware of her in a way that had nothing to do with courtesy. She had fought beside him today. She had stood with him against disaster. She had been fierce and strong and unbreakable, and something in his chest had cracked wide open. When they were both clean and dressed in night clothes, they stood awkwardly in the main room. Dawn would come in a few hours and they both needed sleep, but neither moved toward their separate spaces. "I meant what I said earlier," Fiona said quietly, "about facing this together. I know we agreed this was just business, Isaac, but after today," she stopped, shook her head. "I cannot keep pretending I do not care what happens to you. I cannot pretend this is just a practical arrangement." His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," she looked up at him, and her eyes were full of something that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. "I am saying that somewhere along the way this stopped being business for me. I care about you. About this ranch, about the life we are building. And I know you said love makes people weak, but I think maybe it makes us stronger. Because I fought harder to save that barn today than I have ever fought for anything, and it was because it was yours." Isaac stared at her, his carefully constructed walls crumbling like the burned barn. She was right, everything he had believed about love being dangerous, about keeping his distance being safe. It had all been lies he told himself to avoid being hurt. But he was already hurt. He had been hurting for years, living in isolation, convincing himself that loneliness was strength. "I care about you too," he said, and the admission felt like stepping off a cliff. "I think I started caring the day you arrived, when I saw you step off that stage looking so scared and determined. And every day since then, you have made me care more. The way you laugh when the chickens chase you. The way you hum while you work. The way you stood guard with a rifle to protect the ranch. The way you fought beside me tonight." He took a step toward her. "This stopped being business for me too, Fiona. I do not know when, but it did." She closed the distance between them, and he pulled her into his arms. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked under his chin, her arms wrapped around his waist. He could feel her trembling, or maybe he was the one trembling. It did not matter. For the first time since his mother died, Isaac let himself hold someone he cared about, and it felt like coming home. "I am still scared," she whispered against his chest. "I am scared of losing this." "Of losing you." "I am scared too." He tightened his arms around her. "But I think maybe being scared together is better than being safe alone." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the darkness. When they finally pulled apart, Fiona looked up at him with a question in her eyes. He answered by bending down and kissing her properly for the first time. Her lips were soft and tasted of smoke and tears, and when she kissed him back, he felt like he was falling and flying at the same time. "Stay with me tonight," he said. "Not in the bedroom or the loft, but with me, just stay." She nodded, and they curled together on the floor in front of the dying fire, wrapped in blankets, her back against his chest, his arms around her. As she drifted off to sleep, Isaac lay awake and thought about all the ways his life had changed in a single month. He had thought he wanted a wife for practical reasons, to help build his ranch and secure his land. But what he had needed, what he had been desperately missing, was exactly this: someone to care about, someone who cared about him, someone to make the vast emptiness of the frontier feel less lonely. He had been so wrong. Love did not make you weak, it made you stronger, it made you fight harder, it gave you something worth building, worth protecting, worth surviving for. And as he finally fell asleep with Fiona warm and safe in his arms, Isaac let go of the last of his fear and let himself hope. The trip to see the sheriff the next day was disappointing but not surprising. Sheriff Briggs listened to their story, nodded sympathetically, but said without proof or witnesses beyond Sarah's brief glimpse, there was nothing he could do. Everyone knew Carver was trouble, but knowing and proving were different things. "I will have a talk with him," Briggs promised. "Let him know we are watching. Sometimes that is enough to keep a man in line." It would have to be enough. Isaac and Fiona rode back to the ranch in silence, but it was not the awkward silence of their early days. Fiona's hand rested on his thigh as he drove the wagon, a simple touch that said she was there, she was with him. Over the next weeks they began rebuilding. Isaac had some savings, and they supplemented it by selling a few head of cattle early. Neighbors came to help, people Isaac barely knew showing up with lumber and tools and strong backs. That was the way of the frontier. When disaster struck, you helped because next time it might be you. Sarah Henderson came several times, bringing supplies from her father's store. On credit, she said firmly when Isaac protested. You can pay when you sell your cattle in the fall. Why are you doing this? Isaac asked. Your family barely knows us. Sarah smiled, because you are good people, because Carver is not, and because, she glanced at Fiona, because I can see you two have something special. Something worth protecting. The new barn rose slowly, smaller than the old one but sturdy. Men from neighboring ranches showed up to help raise the frame, and their wives came with food and conversation. Fiona blossomed under the attention, making friends with the other women, laughing and talking in a way Isaac had never heard from her. She was coming alive out here, becoming the person she was meant to be. One evening, as they worked side by side feeding the animals, Fiona said, I have been thinking. About what? About family. She said the word carefully, like it was precious. We said this marriage was business, but it is not anymore. And if it is not business, then maybe, she stopped, her cheeks flushing pink, maybe we should talk about what we want this to be. Isaac set down the bucket he was carrying, turned to face her. What do you want it to be? I want a real marriage, not just living together but building a life together. I want, she took a breath. I want children, Isaac, someday. I want to fill this ranch with family, with love, with all the things I never had growing up. But only if that is what you want too. Children, the idea should have terrified him. His father had lost himself when he lost his family. But instead, Isaac felt that warmth spreading through his chest again, that sense of rightness. He imagined a little girl with Fiona's silver blonde hair, a boy learning to ride, the sound of laughter filling the empty spaces. I want that too, he said. I want all of it with you. Her smile was radiant. Then we have the same goal, a real partnership, a real family. A real love, he added, and pulled her close to kiss her. She melted against him, her arms winding around his neck, and he thought that he had never been so grateful for anything in his life as he was for that advertisement in a Chicago newspaper. That night when they climbed into bed together, she had been sleeping beside him since the night of the fire, Fiona turned to him with a mixture of shyness and determination. Isaac. Yes. I think we should stop waiting. Stop being afraid. She reached for his hand, placed it on her heart. He could feel it racing. I want to be your wife in every way, if you want that too. He did. He wanted it more than he could find words for. So he showed her instead, with gentle hands and soft words, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. And when they came together, it was not just passion but something deeper, a promise, a commitment, a choice to trust each other with everything they were. Afterwards she lay in his arms, tracing patterns on his chest. I love you, she whispered. I know we said we would never say that, but I do. I love you. I love you too. The words came easily, naturally. I think I have loved you from the moment you stepped off that stage looking like the world was going to eat you alive, but you were going to face it anyway. She laughed softly. I thought the same about you. Standing there so stern and proper, but with eyes that looked just as scared as I felt. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time in his life, Isaac felt completely at peace. The peace lasted 3 weeks. Isaac was checking fence line on the eastern boundary when he saw riders approaching. 5 men, led by Dutch Carver. Ice flooded his veins, but he sat his horse calmly, his hand near the rifle in his saddle scabbard. Lawson, Carver pulled up a few feet away. He was a big man, running to fat in middle age, with mean eyes and a cruel mouth. I hear you have been spreading lies about me. I have been telling the truth about you. There is a difference. Careful, boy, I have more men and more guns than you will ever have. You are a tiny piece of dirt on my boot, and I can scrape you off any time I want. My claim is legal and filed. The land grant is approved. I am not going anywhere. Carver's smile was ugly. That pretty wife of yours, where is she right now? Alone at the ranch house, I am guessing. It would be a shame if something happened to her. This is dangerous country. All kinds of accidents can happen. The rage that filled Isaac was white-hot and absolute. If you go near my wife, I will kill you. That is not a threat, that is a promise. Big words from a man with no power. Carver leaned forward in his saddle. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to sell me this land for half what it is worth, and you are going to do it before the end of the month. If you do not, well, he shrugged. I cannot be responsible for what my boys might do. They get bored, they get careless. Houses burn, people disappear. You understand me? Every instinct in Isaac's body screamed to pull his rifle and shoot this man out of his saddle. But Carver had 4 men with him, all armed, and dying for his pride would leave Fiona alone and unprotected. Get off my land, he said instead, his voice deadly calm. 29 days, Carver said. Think about it real careful, Lawson. Think about that pretty little wife and whether this land is worth her life. They rode off, and Isaac sat shaking with fury and fear. Carver had just made his intentions clear. Sell or face consequences, and those consequences would not just be aimed at Isaac, they would be aimed at Fiona, the woman he loved, the woman who had made him believe in hope and family and building something that lasted. He rode home faster than was safe, his heart pounding. He found Fiona in the garden, humming as she weeded the vegetable rows. She looked up at the sound of his horse, and her smile faded when she saw his face. What is wrong? He dismounted, pulled her into his arms, held her so tightly she gasped. Isaac, you are scaring me. What happened? He told her everything, about Carver's threat, the ultimatum, the danger she was in. As he spoke, he felt her go rigid in his arms, but she did not cry, did not fall apart. When he finished, she pulled back and looked up at him with fierce determination. We are not selling. Fiona, he threatened you. He all but said he would hurt you if I do not give him what he wants. I heard you, and I am telling you we are not selling. Her eyes blazed. I have been running my whole life, Isaac. Running from poverty, from loneliness, from fear. I came here to build something that lasts. I came here to have a family, a home, a place that is mine. And I am not giving that up because some bully thinks he can scare us. If something happened to you, his voice broke. I cannot lose you, I cannot. She cupped his face in her hands. Then we fight, we do not run, we fight. Against Carver and all his men, how? I do not know yet, but we will figure it out. She kissed him hard. Together, remember. We face things together. Over the next few days they prepared. Isaac taught Fiona to shoot better, faster, more accurately. They checked and rechecked the house, looking for weak points, places where someone could break in. They told the neighbors what was happening, and several men promised to check on them regularly to keep an eye out for trouble. But Isaac knew it would not be enough. If Carver wanted them gone, he would find a way. And the deadline was approaching, 24 days, then 20, then 15. Isaac began to wonder if he should just sell. What was land compared to Fiona's life? He could find another claim, start over somewhere else, somewhere Carver's reach did not extend. It would be practical, sensible, but every time he thought about suggesting it, he remembered Fiona's words. She had been running her whole life. She wanted to stand and fight, and who was he to take that away from her? 10 days before the deadline, Isaac rode into Bitterroot to pick up supplies. As he was loading the wagon, Sheriff Briggs approached. Lawson, got something you should see. He handed over a wanted poster. Isaac stared at it, his heart beginning to race. The man in the sketch was younger, thinner, but unmistakable. Dutch Carver, wanted for murder in cattle rustling in Kansas 5 years ago, reward of $500. Where did you get this? Came in on the stage this morning. Kansas finally got their act together, sent out new posters with updated information. Briggs took the poster back. I am riding out to arrest him tomorrow. I wanted you to know, in case he tries something desperate. Isaac rode home in a daze. Carver was wanted for murder. He would hang if they caught him. And that meant he had nothing to lose. He found Fiona in the house preparing supper. She took one look at his face and set down her knife. What happened? He told her. About the poster, the murder charge, the arrest that would happen tomorrow. Carver is going to know something is up when the sheriff shows up with deputies. He might run, or he might. He might come here first. To take what he wants by force, since he has nothing left to lose. Yes, Isaac pulled her close. We should leave, tonight, go to town, stay at the boarding house until this is over. No, she said it firmly. If we leave, he will burn everything. He will destroy what we have built just to hurt us. We stay, we defend our home. Fiona. We stay, she pulled back, looked him in the eyes. This is our land, our home. And I am not letting him take it. They prepared as best they could. Isaac loaded every gun they owned, 2 rifles, a shotgun, his pistol. They filled buckets with water and placed them around the house in case of fire. They moved anything valuable into the root cellar. And as darkness fell, they took up positions, Isaac at the front window, Fiona at the back, both watching the night. The attack came just after midnight. Isaac saw the torches first, 6 of them moving across the prairie toward the house. He counted 6 riders, maybe more. Carver was bringing his entire crew. They are coming, he called to Fiona. Stay down. Do not shoot unless you have a clear target. The riders spread out, surrounding the house. One of them fired a shot through the front window and glass exploded inward. Isaac ducked, waited. Another shot and another. They were trying to flush him out, make him panic. Then he smelled smoke. The barn, Fiona screamed. Isaac ran to the back window. The new barn, barely finished, was already engulfed in flames. They had set it ablaze while he was focused on the front. Fury and despair warred in his chest. All that work gone again, but the barn did not matter, not compared to Fiona. Lawson, Carver's voice boomed across the yard. Last chance. Come out and sign over your land, or we burn the house with you in it. Isaac met Fiona's eyes across the room. She was pale but steady, the rifle firm in her hands. Together, she mouthed. He nodded, together. Go to hell, Carver, he shouted back, more shots hammering into the walls. Then the front door shook with a tremendous impact. They were trying to break it down. Isaac aimed through the broken window, saw a man rushing forward with a log. He fired and the man fell. The shooting intensified. Isaac and Fiona returned fire and he heard a scream. One of them hit, but there were too many. Sooner or later they would get in or the house would catch fire and then he heard something that made his heart soar. Hoofbeats, many of them, and a voice shouting, "Hold your fire, this is Sheriff Briggs, you are surrounded." The shooting stopped. Isaac risked a glance out the window and saw at least a dozen riders, all wearing badges. The sheriff had brought every deputy and volunteer he could muster. Carver and his men threw down their weapons. It was over. Isaac and Fiona stumbled out onto the porch, clinging to each other. The sheriff was dismounting, his face grim. "We heard the shooting from town," he said. "Figured Carver might try something when he heard we were coming for him. Looks like we got here just in time." Isaac could not speak. He just held Fiona, his face buried in her hair, his whole body shaking with relief. She was safe. They were both safe. The sheriff arrested Carver and his men, loading them into a wagon for transport. As they drove away, Carver glared at Isaac with pure hatred. "This is not over, Lawson." "Yes, it is," the sheriff said. "You are going to hang Dutch. You picked the wrong fight this time." After they left, neighbors began arriving, alerted by the same gunfire that had brought the sheriff. They helped put out what was left of the barn fire, offered places for Isaac and Fiona to stay while they cleaned up. But Fiona refused to leave. "This is our home," she said. "We are staying." They spent the rest of the night cleaning up, boarding over the broken window, checking for damage. As dawn broke over the prairie, they stood together on the porch, exhausted and smoke-stained but alive. "We did it," Fiona said softly. "We fought and we won." "You were incredible." Isaac turned her to face him. "You could have run. You could have hidden, but you stood with me." "Where else would I be?" she smiled. "You are my husband, this is my home, of course I stood with you." He kissed her then, deep and hard, pouring all his love and relief and gratitude into it. When they finally broke apart, the sun was fully up, painting the world in shades of gold. "We need to rebuild the barn again," she said. "I know. And fix the window. And probably a dozen other things I have not noticed yet. I know. But we will do it together." Yes, he pulled her close, together. The trial happened 3 weeks later in the territorial capital. Isaac and Fiona traveled there to testify, along with Sarah Henderson and several others who had suffered at Carver's hands over the years. The evidence was overwhelming. Carver was convicted of murder, attempted murder, arson, and a dozen other charges. They hanged him on a bright autumn morning, and Isaac felt nothing but relief. It was over, truly over. They returned to the ranch to find the neighbors had banded together again. A new barn stood where the old one had been, larger than before. The vegetable garden had been tended. Fresh bread sat on the table inside the house. "Welcome home," Sarah Henderson said, grinning. "We figured you would need a hand when you got back." Fiona burst into tears, overwhelmed by the kindness. These people, most of whom had been strangers just months ago, had come together to help them. That was the frontier too, not just hardship and danger but community and support. Life settled into a new rhythm. Autumn came and they harvested the garden, put up preserves, prepared for winter. Isaac sold his cattle at market for a good price, and they used the money to buy more stock, expand the herd. The land grant was finalized, and their ranch now stretched across 500 acres of prime grazing land. In November, Fiona told him she was pregnant. Isaac was in the barn when she came to find him, and the look on her face made his heart skip. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," she took his hands. "Isaac, I am with child. We are going to have a baby." He stared at her, stunned. A baby, their baby. The family they had talked about was becoming real, and instead of fear, all he felt was joy. Fiona. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around. Fiona, he could not find words big enough for what he felt. She laughed, holding on to him. "I know, I feel the same way." They told the neighbors, who celebrated with them. The women immediately began planning, offering advice and baby clothes and promises to help when the time came. Fiona blossomed through the winter, her belly growing round, her face glowing with happiness. On a cold night in March, their daughter was born. Isaac held her minutes after she entered the world, this tiny, perfect creature with her mother's blonde hair and his blue eyes. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "What should we name her?" Fiona asked, exhausted but smiling from the bed. Isaac thought about everything they had survived to get to this moment. The loneliness, the fear, the fight for their home, the love that had grown between them despite all their attempts to keep it at bay. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope." "Hope Lawson." Fiona reached for the baby and Isaac placed her carefully in her arms. "It is perfect." As he watched his wife and daughter together, Isaac thought about the man he had been a year ago. Alone, convinced that love was dangerous, that the frontier was too harsh for anything but survival. He had wanted a wife for practical reasons, never imagining that what he really needed was a family, a love that made everything else worthwhile. Fiona had needed a family too. She had spent years alone, convinced that safety was more important than connection. But together, they had created something neither could have built alone, a life of love in a harsh land, a home that would stand against any storm. Years passed. Hope grew into a bright, fearless little girl who loved the horses and the wide open spaces. She was joined by a brother, James, and then another sister, Mary. The ranch prospered, the herd grew, and Isaac became known as one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. But his greatest success was not measured in cattle or acres. It was measured in the laughter that filled the house each evening. In Fiona's smile across the dinner table, after 15 years of marriage still making his heart skip. In his children racing across the prairie, free and joyful in a way he had never been as a child. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Hope now 12 and helping with the ranch work, Fiona leaned against Isaac's shoulder. "Do you remember the day I arrived?" she asked. "Every detail." "You looked so scared." "I was terrified. I thought I was making the worst mistake of my life." She turned to look up at him, "But it was the best choice I ever made." "Mine too." He kissed the top of her head. "I thought I wanted a wife to help me build a ranch, but what I really needed was you to help me build a life." "We built it together," she said softly. "And it turned out better than either of us ever imagined." Inside the house, he could hear the children arguing over something, then laughing. The sound was sweet, the sound of home. Isaac thought about his father, lost after his mother died, and understood now what had broken him. It was not love that had destroyed his father, it was losing it and having nothing else left to live for. But Isaac had built something stronger. He and Fiona had built a partnership based on honesty and trust, a love that had survived fire and violence and fear. They had created a family that would continue long after they were gone. And every day they chose each other again, finding new reasons to be grateful for that first awkward meeting at the stage. The sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, painting the prairie in colors too beautiful for words. Fiona's hand found his, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. And Isaac thought about the advertisement he had placed in that Chicago newspaper, the practical words meant to attract a practical wife. He had gotten so much more than he asked for. He had gotten everything he needed. He had gotten Fiona, and together they had created a life of love.